Picture this. You're sitting at your kitchen table on a Sunday night, laptop open, and you're doing that thing you've been avoiding for 3 weeks. You're actually looking at your credit card statements. All of them. And somewhere between the third statement and the fourth, something shifts in your stomach. Because the numbers don't add up the way you thought they would. You've been making payments every single month. You've never missed one. You're responsible. You're doing everything right. And somehow, the balance is higher than it was 6 months ago. If that hit a little close to home, stay with me. Because what's happening to you isn't bad luck. It isn't a personal failure. It isn't even really your fault. It is, however, a perfectly engineered system that was specifically designed to keep you exactly where you are, paying forever, getting nowhere. Here's the number that should be making national headlines every single day, but somehow never does. Americans currently owe $1.25 trillion in credit card debt. Not total household debt, not mortgages, not student loans, just credit cards. $1.25 trillion in revolving balances that are quietly draining the financial futures of millions of people who think they're managing their money just fine. My name is Bob, and I spend a probably unhealthy amount of time thinking about money, financial psychology, and the invisible systems that keep ordinary people stuck, while a small group of people get extraordinarily wealthy off their confusion. If you want to understand how money actually works, instead of just hoping things magically improve someday, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up changing the way you see your wallet. Now, before we get into why this credit card trap is so much more sinister than people realize, let me ask you something. When you think about people who are bad with money, what comes to mind? Maybe someone who blows their paycheck on designer clothes? Maybe someone who goes out every weekend and never saves anything? The person who just can't control themselves. That's the story we've all been told. Bad with money is a character flaw. It's impulsiveness. It's weakness. But here's the thing they're not telling you. The average American household carrying credit card debt isn't reckless. They're not irresponsible. They're not buying bottles at clubs every Friday night. They're buying groceries. They're paying for car repairs. They're covering the gap between what life costs and what their paycheck covers. And the system they're using to fill that gap is one of the most profitable financial products ever invented in human history. Not profitable for them, profitable for the people on the other side of the transaction. This is not a video about telling you to stop buying coffee. This is a video about understanding the actual machine you're trapped inside, why it's so hard to escape, and what the math looks like when you finally see it clearly. Let's start with something that sounds obvious, but almost nobody actually thinks about. A credit card is not a payment method. I know that sounds strange because you use it to pay for things, but functionally, mechanically, in terms of what it actually does to your financial life, a credit card is a loan. Every single time you swipe and don't pay the full balance at the end of the month, you have taken out a loan. A very short-term, very high-interest loan from a company that employs entire departments of mathematicians and behavioral psychologists whose entire job is to make sure you never fully pay it back. Think about that for a second. When you applied for your credit card, there was a team of people on the other end who already knew, statistically, how you were going to use it. They knew what percentage of people like you would carry a balance. They knew how long you'd carry it. They knew roughly how much you'd pay in interest before you either paid it off or got another card to transfer the balance. They had you modeled before you even opened the envelope. And here's where it gets really interesting. The entire credit card business model only works if a significant portion of cardholders never pay their balance in full. The people who pay in full every month, the ones who collect the points and the cash back and then clear the slate, the industry has a name for them. They call them deadbeats. Not because they don't pay, because they pay too much. They're not profitable. The profit lives entirely in the people carrying balances, which right now is a lot of people. A $1.25 trillion lot of people. Now let's talk about the number that will make you want to put your credit card through a paper shredder.
The average credit card interest rate in America right now is hovering around 21 to 22% annually. 21%. Let's put that in perspective. The stock market, over long periods of time, returns roughly 8 to 10% per year. Your credit card is charging you more than double what the greatest wealth-building machine in history produces. Every dollar you owe on a credit card is working harder against you than the S&P 500 has ever worked for anyone.
Here's the math that nobody shows you when you're signing up for that card with the nice metal finish and the airport lounge access. Say you have $5,000 in credit card debt at 21% interest, and you make the minimum payment every month. That minimum payment is probably somewhere around $100 to $125. Feels manageable, right? That's the point. Here's what's actually happening. Of that $125 payment, roughly $87 is going straight to interest. You're only reducing your actual balance by about $38 per month. At that rate, it will take you over 15 years to pay off that $5,000. And by the time you're done, you will have paid nearly $9,000 in interest on top of the original balance. You borrowed $5,000, you paid back $14,000. That is not a payment plan. That is a subscription to being broke.
But here's the part that most people completely miss, and this might be the most important thing in this entire video. The minimum payment isn't designed to help you pay off your debt. It's designed to keep you in debt as long as mathematically possible while still technically complying with consumer protection laws. The minimum payment exists at the intersection of keeping you current so you don't default and keeping you paying interest so the bank stays profitable. It is engineered to that exact balance point. Not $1 more than necessary to prevent a default, not $1 less than necessary to keep the interest flowing. And here's something that will probably make you angry when you hear it. Credit card companies are legally required to tell you on your statement exactly how long it will take to pay off your balance if you only make minimum payments. It's right there on every statement. Most people have never looked at that number. The company puts it there because the law requires them to, and they put it in the smallest, least prominent place on the page because nothing about their business model benefits from you reading it carefully.
Now let's talk about your brain, because this is where things get really practical and really uncomfortable at the same time. The reason the credit card trap is so effective isn't just mathematical, it's neurological. Your brain is not equipped to deal with credit cards. That's not an insult, it's just true. Human brains evolved to respond to immediate rewards and immediate threats. We are genuinely terrible at processing costs that are delayed and abstract. And credit card debt is the most delayed, most abstract cost that exists in modern life. When you pay cash for something, your brain registers a loss in real time. Studies using brain imaging have actually shown that paying with cash activates the same pain centers in your brain as physical pain. Mild pain, but real. This is why people who use cash tend to spend less. The loss is immediate and visceral, and your brain fights it. When you swipe a credit card, none of that happens. The purchase feels free. The consequence is a month away, and even when the bill arrives, it's abstract. It's just a number on a screen. Your brain doesn't connect that number to the dinner you had 3 weeks ago, or the shoes you bought on a Wednesday afternoon because you were having a bad day. The psychological distance between the purchase and the payment is so large that your brain essentially treats them as unrelated events. And that gap, that distance between spending and consequence, is worth hundreds of billions of dollars a year to the credit card industry. There's also something called the credit card premium effect. Research has consistently shown that people are willing to pay significantly more for the same item when paying by credit card versus cash. One study found people would bid up to twice as much for the same item at auction when using a credit card. Twice as much. Not because the item was worth more, because the pain of paying was removed. The card industry doesn't just benefit from the interest you pay. They benefit from the fact that you spend more money in the first place when you're using their product. It's a two-sided revenue machine, and you're funding both sides. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that will probably surprise you.
The credit card trap doesn't just affect your bank account. It affects your entire life trajectory in ways that almost nobody connects back to that plastic card in your wallet. Let's talk about what carrying credit card debt does to your career. When you're paying $300, $400, $500 a month in minimum payments, that's money that cannot go toward an emergency fund, which means when your boss does something you don't like, you can't afford to quit. When a better opportunity comes along that requires a few months of lower income while you transition, you can't take the risk. When someone asks you to come in on Saturday, even though you have plans, you say yes because you need the job more than you need the Saturday. Credit card debt doesn't just cost you money, it costs you options. And options are how careers actually advance. Think about the last time you had a difficult conversation at work. Maybe you wanted to push back on something. Maybe you wanted to negotiate your salary. Maybe you wanted to say no to something unreasonable. Now think about how much harder that conversation is when you know that your monthly minimum payments are $600 and your emergency fund is basically zero. The psychological weight of debt changes how you negotiate, how you advocate for yourself, and how much risk you're willing to accept in pursuit of something better. It keeps you compliant, and a compliant workforce is extremely valuable to the people writing the paychecks. Now let's zoom out and look at what this looks like at scale. Because $1.25 trillion didn't appear overnight. It's the result of decades of deliberate, systematic expansion of consumer credit into every corner of American life. In the 1970s, credit cards were relatively uncommon, and interest rates were regulated. Then deregulation happened. Banks could suddenly charge whatever interest rates they wanted, and coincidentally, credit card marketing budgets exploded.
Today, the average American household has 4 credit cards. Not 1, 4. And the offers keep coming. 0% introductory rates designed to get you in the door before the real rate kicks in. Balance transfer offers that feel like relief, but often come with transfer fees and a clock ticking toward a rate that makes your original card look generous. Buy now, pay later products that have quietly extended the same psychological trick of separating purchase from consequence to an entirely new generation of younger consumers who watched their parents struggle with credit cards and thought they were making a smarter choice. Here's something that might blow your mind when you hear it. The total amount Americans pay in credit card interest and fees every single year is over $130 billion. $130 billion extracted from ordinary households and transferred to financial institutions annually. To put that in perspective, that's more than the GDP of most countries. That's more than the US spends on primary and secondary education. It is an absolutely staggering transfer of wealth, happening quietly, automatically, one minimum payment at a time, to a population that largely has no idea it's occurring.
And here's the thing that makes this particularly cruel. The people paying the most in interest are almost always the people who can least afford it. Credit card interest rates are inversely correlated with income. If you have good credit because you have money, you get lower rates. If you have less money and shakier credit, you get higher rates. The system charges poor people more to borrow money than it charges rich people, which means the wealth transfer happening through credit card interest is always flowing in the same direction, from the people who need money to the people who have it. Now, let's talk about something called the debt spiral, because this is where the $1.25 trillion number starts to make complete sense. Most people don't end up in serious credit card debt because of one big irresponsible decision. They end up there through a series of completely rational short-term decisions that compound over time into an irrational long-term outcome. It starts with something manageable, maybe a medical bill, maybe a car repair that wiped out the savings account, maybe a period of reduced income where the card filled the gap. And at first, it's fine. You're going to pay it off. You have a plan. But then something else happens, because something else always happens. And now the balance is a little higher, and the minimum payment is a little bigger, and there's a little less money left over at the end of each month to make extra payments. And gradually, slowly, the balance becomes something you're managing, rather than something you're eliminating. This is the psychological transition that the credit card companies are counting on. The shift from thinking about your balance as a temporary problem to accepting it as a permanent feature of your financial life. Once you mentally accept the debt as normal, once it stops feeling like an emergency, the urgency to pay it off disappears. And without urgency, minimum payments become the default. And minimum payments are extremely profitable.
Here's a reality check that I want you to sit with for a moment. The average American carrying credit card debt has been carrying it for over 3 years. Not 3 months, 3 years. What started as a temporary solution has become a permanent tax on every paycheck. A quiet monthly withdrawal from your future self to subsidize your past self's emergencies. And here's the brutal irony. By the time you've been carrying that balance for 3 years, you've probably paid back the original amount you borrowed in interest alone. You're now just paying interest on the interest. The original purchase that started all of this is long gone. You're paying for a ghost. But here's where most people mess this up, and I see this constantly. They get serious about paying off their credit cards, they sacrifice for a few months, they make real progress, and then the card company does something beautiful. They increase your credit limit, and suddenly that available credit feels like breathing room, and the cycle begins again. Credit limit increases are not a reward for good behavior. They are bait. They exist because a customer who maxes out their card and then pays it down is about to stop being profitable. An increased limit keeps the game going. And here's the part that will make you question everything you thought you knew about credit scores. Your credit utilization, which is how much of your available credit you're using, is one of the biggest factors in your credit score, which means the system actually incentivizes you to keep credit cards open and use them. It rewards you with a higher score for participating in the system. And a higher credit score unlocks what exactly? More credit, more cards, higher limits. The whole apparatus is self-reinforcing. It's designed to keep you inside it. Now, I want to be very clear about something before we talk about what to do. Using a credit card and paying it off in full every month is genuinely one of the smartest financial moves you can make. You get purchase protection, you get fraud protection, you potentially get rewards or cash back. You build a credit history that affects your mortgage rate, your car insurance premium, and sometimes even your job prospects. The card itself is not evil. The trap is the balance. The trap is the interest. The trap is the minimum payment. So what do you actually do if you're in it? There are really only 2 mathematical approaches to paying off multiple credit card balances, and the research on human psychology suggests one of them works significantly better in the real world, even though it's slightly less efficient on paper. The first approach is called the avalanche method. You list all your debts by interest rate and attack the highest rate first while making minimums on everything else. Mathematically optimal, saves the most money in interest. The problem is that if your highest interest card also has your largest balance, you might be chipping away at it for a year before you see it go to zero, and most people run out of motivation before they run out of debt. The second approach is called the snowball method. You list your debts by balance, smallest to largest, and attack the smallest balance first, regardless of interest rate. The math is slightly less efficient, but the psychological impact of actually seeing a balance hit zero, of closing an account, of having one fewer card to worry about, is enormous. Research consistently shows that people who use the snowball method are more likely to actually finish paying off their debt, even though they pay a little more in interest along the way, because they stay motivated. And a plan you stick with beats a plan that's theoretically perfect every single time. Here's something else nobody tells you. If you have a good payment history and you call your credit card company and ask them to lower your interest rate, they will sometimes do it. Not always, but the success rate is higher than most people expect because they never try. The worst they can say is no, and you're in exactly the same position you were before the call. But if they say yes, you just changed the math of your debt without changing your balance. That phone call takes 10 minutes and could save you thousands of dollars. It costs you nothing to try. And here's the mindset shift that changes everything. Stop thinking about credit card debt as a monthly payment. Start thinking about it as a guaranteed return. If you have a credit card charging you 21% interest, paying off that card is the equivalent of making a 21% guaranteed return on your money. There is no investment on earth that gives you a guaranteed 21% annual return. Not the stock market, not real estate, not anything. Paying off high-interest debt is the highest guaranteed return available to ordinary people, and it is almost universally underrated. The $1.25 trillion sitting on American credit cards right now isn't a mystery. It isn't evidence of a nation of irresponsible spenders. It's the predictable mathematical output of a system that was engineered to grow, that benefits from confusion, that profits from minimum payments, and that has successfully convinced an entire country that carrying a balance is normal. It's not normal. It's expensive. And the difference between the person who figures that out at 30 versus the person who figures it out at 50 is measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars.
You don't need to be a financial genius to escape the trap. You need a clear picture of what it's actually costing you, a plan you can stick with, and the understanding that every dollar you throw at that balance is earning you a return that Wall Street can't touch. Your future self is going to live in the financial world your present self builds right now. Build something worth living in.
Let's talk about something that financial advisors almost never bring up in their polished office consultations: the hidden costs of credit card debt that don't show up on your statement. Because the interest is just the part you can see. There's a whole invisible layer of damage happening underneath that most people never connect back to that balance on their card. Start with insurance. Your credit score, which is heavily influenced by your credit card behavior, directly affects what you pay for car insurance in most states. Two people driving the same car, same age, same driving record, the one with the lower credit score pays meaningfully more every single month. That's not a small number over a lifetime. That's thousands of dollars in additional premiums paid to an insurance company because of a credit card balance that started with a car repair 3 years ago. Then there's housing. Whether you're renting or buying, your credit profile follows you. Landlords run credit checks. A history of high utilization or late payments can get your rental application rejected in favor of someone with a cleaner profile. And if you're trying to buy a home, the difference between a good credit score and a great credit score can be the difference between a 6.5% mortgage rate and a 7.2% mortgage rate. On a $300,000 mortgage over 30 years, that difference costs you over $50,000 because of a credit card balance. The ripple effects are enormous, and almost nobody is calculating them. And then there's the opportunity cost. This is the one that really should keep people up at night, but somehow doesn't because it's invisible. Every dollar you're sending to your credit card company in interest is a dollar that isn't going into an investment account. It isn't compounding. It isn't growing. It's gone. And in a world where compound interest is the most powerful wealth-building force available to ordinary people, every month of delay is genuinely expensive in ways that are hard to fully comprehend until you run the actual numbers. Here's a comparison that I want you to think about carefully. Two people, same income, same age, both 28 years old. Person A is carrying $8,000 in credit card debt at 21% interest and making minimum payments. They're paying roughly $140 a month in minimum payments, of which about $110 is pure interest. Person B has no credit card debt and instead invests that same $140 every month into a simple index fund, earning 8% annually. Fast forward 30 years. Person A has been feeding the credit card machine. Even if they eventually pay it off, those years of minimum payments and interest have consumed tens of thousands of dollars that produced nothing. No asset, no return, just the privilege of having borrowed money and paid it back slowly at an enormous premium. Person B, investing that $140 a month for 30 years at 8%, ends up with approximately $190,000 from $140 a month. That is the real cost of carrying a credit card balance. Not the interest rate, not the minimum payment. It's the $190,000 that never existed because the money was going the wrong direction. This is what wealthy people mean when they talk about making money work for you.
They don't mean anything mysterious or complicated. They mean pointing your money toward assets instead of toward interest payments. And the first step in doing that is eliminating the highest cost money leaks in your financial life. Credit card interest is almost always the biggest one. Now, let's talk about something called lifestyle creep, because it is deeply connected to how credit card balances grow without people noticing. Lifestyle creep is what happens when your income goes up, but your savings don't, because your spending rises to match your new income, almost automatically. You get a raise, you move to a slightly nicer apartment, you upgrade your car, you eat out a little more often. None of these individual decisions feel irresponsible. Each one feels earned, but collectively they consume the raise entirely, and sometimes more than the raise. And here's where credit cards supercharge lifestyle creep into something dangerous. Because the card gives you the ability to live at a lifestyle level slightly above what your income actually supports. Not dramatically above, just slightly. Maybe a few $100s a month above. And slightly above, sustained over time, is how ordinary people end up with balances they can't explain and can't escape. The psychological mechanism here is something called hedonic adaptation. Whatever level of comfort you experience becomes your new baseline very quickly. The slightly nicer apartment stops feeling like a luxury after 2 months. It just feels like home. The upgraded car stops feeling special after 6 weeks. It's just your car. And the spending level that felt extravagant when you first started doing it becomes the minimum acceptable standard faster than you can possibly imagine. Your brain is extraordinarily good at normalizing upward and extraordinarily resistant to normalizing downward. This is why cutting expenses feels so painful, even when the expenses are objectively unnecessary. It's not weakness, it's neuroscience. Your brain experiences a reduction in spending as a genuine loss, even when what you're losing is something you didn't have 6 months ago. The credit card companies understand this perfectly. They're not just selling you credit, they're helping you ratchet up your lifestyle to a level you can't sustain on income alone. And then they collect rent on the gap forever. Here's something that will change the way you look at every major purchase for the rest of your life. There's a concept in economics called the pain of paying, and it varies dramatically based on how close in time you are to the payment. When you pay cash, the pain is immediate and maximum. When you write a check, slightly delayed, slightly less painful. When you use a debit card, a little more removed. When you use a credit card, the pain is deferred an entire billing cycle and diluted into a statement full of other charges. And when you make only the minimum payment, you never fully feel the pain of any individual purchase at all. You just feel the vague weight of a balance. This graduated reduction in payment pain is not accidental. It was studied, optimized, and deliberately engineered. The further the payment is from the purchase, the more you spend. That's the foundation of the entire consumer credit industry, and understanding it is the first step to being immune to it. Now let's talk about the generation that's getting hit hardest by this right now, because it's a piece of the story that needs to be told. Millennials and Gen Z are carrying credit card debt at rates that are genuinely alarming when you look at the data. And the circumstances that got them there are different from previous generations in ways that matter.
This is the first generation in American history that is broadly earning less in real terms than their parents did at the same age. They entered the workforce during or after the 2008 financial crisis. They graduated with historically unprecedented levels of student loan debt. They've been trying to save for homes in the most unaffordable housing market since records began. And they've been doing all of this while being targeted by the most sophisticated financial marketing apparatus ever created, including social media that shows them a curated highlight reel of exactly the lifestyle they should theoretically be living. The credit card becomes the bridge between the life they see and the life they can afford. And once you're using credit as a bridge, it is very hard to stop, because the alternative is admitting that the gap exists, and that is an emotionally painful thing to accept in a culture that ties self-worth to spending power. But here is what I want you to understand clearly. Being in that trap does not say anything about your intelligence. It does not say anything about your work ethic. It does not say anything about your character. It says something about the environment you were dropped into and the tools you were given, or more accurately, not given, to navigate it. Nobody sits down in high school and learns about minimum payment mathematics, or hedonic adaptation, or the pain of paying.
You were handed a card and a limit and wished good luck. The information asymmetry between you and the credit card company on the day you signed that application was staggering. They knew everything about how people like you use credit. They had actuarial models and behavioral economists and decades of data. You had a shiny card and a sign-up bonus. That's not a fair game. But now you know how it works, and knowing how it works is how you start winning it.
Let's get into the practical side of this more deeply, because I don't want to leave you with just a diagnosis. I want to give you the actual framework. Step 1 is what I call the full picture moment. Most people who are in credit card debt do not actually know the full scope of what they owe. They know roughly what the balances are, but they don't know the exact interest rates on each card. They don't know what minimum payments are actually costing them in interest versus principal reduction each month. They don't know the total amount they would pay if they just made minimums on everything forever.
This full picture moment is uncomfortable. It is genuinely unpleasant to sit down and add all of this up. But you cannot solve a problem you won't look at directly. Get every statement. Write down every balance, every interest rate, every minimum payment. Then look up the minimum payment calculator online and run the numbers on each card. Sit with those numbers for a moment. Let them be real. That discomfort is productive. It's the thing that creates enough urgency to actually change behavior.
Step 2 is stopping the bleeding before you start the surgery. If you're carrying credit card balances and you're still using your credit cards for everyday spending, you have to address that first. Not necessarily by cutting them up dramatically like some financial gurus suggest, because that can actually hurt your credit score, but by being ruthlessly honest about whether your monthly spending is within your monthly income. Because if it isn't, paying down debt is like bailing out a boat with a bucket while someone else pours water in the other end. You have to fix the inflow before the bailing out has any chance of working. Step 3 is finding the extra money. And I want to be specific here because most advice on this is frustratingly vague. The average American household spends approximately $300 per month on subscriptions they don't actively use. Not $300 on all subscriptions, $300 on subscriptions they've forgotten about or stopped using but never canceled. Streaming services from a free trial that became a paid subscription, gym memberships from a New Year's resolution, apps that auto-renew annually. Go through your bank and credit card statements for the last 3 months and highlight every recurring charge. Cancel everything that doesn't make your daily life meaningfully better. That alone often frees up $200 to $400 per month that can go directly at a credit card balance.
Then look at the big 3: housing, transportation, and food. These 3 categories represent the vast majority of most people's spending, and they're also the 3 categories where small optimizations produce the largest results. One less restaurant meal per week is $150 to $200 per month. Refinancing or shopping your car insurance could save $50 to $100 per month. Even small adjustments in grocery shopping habits can free up $100 to $150. You're not looking for perfection. You're looking for an extra $300 to $500 per month to throw at debt. Most households have it somewhere if they look honestly.
Step 4 is the income side, because cutting expenses only gets you so far. There is a ceiling on how much you can cut. There is no ceiling on how much you can earn. And in 2026, the options for generating additional income have genuinely never been more accessible. That's not hype, it's just true. Whether it's freelancing in whatever skill you use in your main job, selling things you own and don't use, picking up shifts in the gig economy, or starting to build something on the side, an extra $300 to $500 per month of income directed entirely at credit card debt changes the timeline dramatically.
Let's run that math. If you have $8,000 in credit card debt and you find an extra $500 per month to throw at it above your minimum payments, you go from paying it off in 15 plus years to paying it off in approximately 18 months. 18 months versus 15 years. From finding $500 extra per month. The math of extra payments is not linear, it's exponential in the other direction. Every extra dollar you pay reduces the principal faster, which reduces the interest charged next month, which means more of next month's payment goes to principal, which accelerates everything.
And here is the final thing I want to leave you with, because it's the piece that ties all of this together. The credit card trap is ultimately a trap about identity. The people who escape it are not smarter than the people who stay in it. They are not more disciplined. They are not making dramatically different choices every day. The difference is that at some point, they stopped identifying as someone who carries credit card debt and started identifying as someone who doesn't. That identity shift changes every small decision in a way that willpower alone never can. Willpower is finite. Identity is constant. When not carrying a balance becomes who you are rather than what you're trying to do, the decisions become automatic.
$1.25 trillion. That number represents millions of people running in place, working hard, doing everything they were told to do, and wondering why they can never seem to get ahead. Now you know why. And more importantly, now you know how the machine works, where its weaknesses are, and exactly what it takes to step outside of it. The version of you that's free from credit card debt doesn't live in some abstract future. They live about 18 to 36 months away from where you're standing right now. The only question is whether you're willing to see the trap clearly enough to start walking out of it. Start tonight. Pull up the statements. Run the numbers. Let them be uncomfortable.
And then decide that you are done being the product.
Your future self is going to live in the financial world your present self builds right now. Build something worth living in.